The Florida Podcast Network, the voice of Florida.
Welcome to episode 10 of the Florida Podcasting News Show on the Florida Podcast Network. Florida Podcasting News keeps you on the inside of Florida's podcasting industry.
Florida's podcasting scene is bursting this month with milestones and news, and we're going to share some of that with you on today's episode. Next, in general podcast news, we'll talk about a big move two major podcast players just made to improve listener experience, and we'll also share our recent interview with Dave Cook, co-founder of Podcoin, who joined us to answer some podcaster questions, maybe even yours. Then we'll chat about the big news Florida Podcast Network just dropped yesterday and close the show, as always, with a final tip.
And I'm talking today about sponsorships, the question
Yes,
I get
you
most
are.
often. So stay tuned for that. We're going to talk about how I do that with Horse Radio Network and how we're doing that with our network as well.
How do we monetize, Glenn? How do we monetize? How do we make money? How do we get sponsors?
I got 3 emails this week, and there are about 1,000 posts on the Facebook pages. This episode is brought to you by Flintstone Media. Thank you for joining us.
This is Jemmy.
And this is Glenn. Welcome back to a brand new episode of Florida Podcasting News. Jemmy has had an amazingly busy week this week. Probably the busiest one since we started working together.
Oh my gosh. I mean, it's just been insanity. First of all, they're not paying me to do this, but
I dumped all the work on her. And
major plug for the Hive app. I think it's called like Keeping Busy People Organized or something. I don't know what it's called, but it's called Hive. And without this organization app, I would have been a lost cause.
Now, Jemmy, the way this is important because different people organize different ways. I do it all in my head and do it poorly. Jemmy actually on her phone, and I've traveled with her enough to see this. On her phone, she just had a notepad open, and she would write on the notepad the day of the week and the 1,000 things she had to do, and the notepad file would just be 20 pages long.
No. See, you're giving me way too much credit. It originally started as days of the week with listed what, and then it just turned into one giant long list of things.
Which is great because it's all written down, but there's no priorities set to it.
There's no priorities. There's no organization. This would be my routine every time. Look down the list for the thing that's the most important. Have a panic attack that I missed it. And look down the list again for the thing that was it's now.
I did notice you missed less stuff this week.
I missed a lot less stuff. So I put all those stuff from my phone, long list of my phone pad, to the Hive app. And let me tell you, it has changed everything because, as you'll hear a little bit later, I took on a brand new project that's just massive. So I really needed the time to organize myself. So I finally did that, and it has helped a lot because, yeah, I've been busy.
Well, congratulations. Now, we're going to have to know. See, the problem, you know what my problem would be if I had an application like Hive, don't you?
You would never use it. It would sit there and be a
Putting
virtual paperweight is what it would do. It would be the new paperweight.
That kind of app is only good if you actually put stuff in it. That's when it's good. Because if you don't put anything in it, it doesn't accomplish anything.
Oh, gosh. Putting stuff in it has just, I'm telling you, caused me such a relief from my anxiety. So thank you to Hive and all the people behind it. So, but anyways, one thing that does not cause me, at least not that much anxiety, is this show. I love this show. And this show comes out the 1st and 15th of every month. And on the 15th, like with this episode, there's a newsletter that accompanies it. So go to floridapodcastnews.com if you're not signed up for that newsletter yet, so you don't miss any future issues. And if you have missed past issues, then you can find them there as well. And with that said, we'll head off to the Florida industry news. So like I said, there's a lot going on in Florida right now. People are making some crazy moves. And I want to start off with our buddy in Jacksonville, who's done something really cool. He's starting a second show, and his name is Jonathan Oakes.
Wait.
What?
You are missing the lead here. Jonathan. I mean, our buddy Jonathan. You're going to lead with Jonathan?
What? He leads the room no matter where he goes.
Does he have 2,200 episodes in his show?
Oh, no. So maybe
Sorry,
we
Jonathan.
should. Okay. All right. I'll give it to you then. Let's clear the podium once more and allow Glenn the space he requires, the spotlight he deserves. I know what this news is. Glenn, please share it with the people.
We're just so excited. And this credits my entire team, actually. Horses in the Morning.
No, wait. Stop. I want everyone to remember this comes from one of the most successful podcasters on planet Earth. So
I have to give credit to a lot of people here. We have a show on the Horse Radio Network called Horses in the Morning. And as best I can tell, talking to the powers that be in the horse world, or in the podcasting world, Horses in the Morning is in the top 10 longest running daily podcasts in the world.
Wow.
We have been doing it for 10 years, 5 days a week, and we don't miss. You know that. If we're not around, there's a best of, there's a show.
I know, there's something.
So we have hit 2,200 episodes this week. We just went, and it's so ironic because we have a show, one episode a month dedicated to endurance riding, which are crazy people who ride 100 miles in one day. And we hit 2,200 episodes on the Endurance Day, which I think was more appropriate.
And I was the producer on that episode, which was a lot of fun. I felt super privileged. I was like, yes, I get to produce the 22nd 100 episode of a thing. That's amazing.
It hasn't been done too often. There aren't too many out there. And we're very proud of that. We have 16 sponsors for this show. We have 14 hosts and producers that work on this show.
Wow.
So it is a major event, but it is by far our most successful show on the Horse Radio Network, and it's our most profitable. Without Horses in the Morning, we would not have a network.
And when you say a number like 2,200, I guarantee you, every podcaster who's listening is right now either super inspired or
depressed,
crying a little bit.
Well, I gotta say, and Jemmy knows this show is a lot of work. It's an hour and a half, 5 days a week.
Especially just the part of dealing with you.
Yes.
That's the hardest part.
But we do our prep. We have a lot of prep that goes into this. Jennifer books all the guests. There are 10 guests a week on this show.
Yeah.
So there's 10 guests a week that have to be booked, and it's a lot of work. But the audience loves this show. It's our most popular one. We have about 45,000 unique listeners every month to this show. So they may not tune into every episode, all 20. There's a lot of people that do, but some may tune into 5 of them or whatever. But we're very proud of it, and thank you to my entire team who helps make this show possible, and that includes you. Okay, now let's get on to that Jonathan guy.
I don't know what King fanfare sounds like, so that's my best.
Yeah, what about that Jonathan guy up there in Florida?
All right, the Jonathan guy out of Jacksonville. Y'all know him best as the man behind Trivial Warfare, and we're so excited that he is actually...
Oh, speaking of me...
what? Oh, again.
Did I ever tell you that Diane Daniels, also from Florida, and I went on that show and we won? We beat him. So just saying that we went on Trivial Warfare.
I have a feeling all the talent was on the...
I'm just saying.
Was on the other side of the team.
Diane may have helped.
Yeah, I have a feeling I'm pretty accurate. Anyway, so we get back to Jonathan, please. So he now, in addition to Trivial Warfare, now has another podcast out there. And major shout out to Lee Silverstein for just being a really awesome dude and posting about it. He actually shared someone else's show, which was a really cool thing that some podcasters are big enough to do. So well done, Lee. But he wanted to announce on Jonathan's behalf that Jonathan has this new second show. So it's called Foreplay, which I thought was hilarious, by the way. Jonathan. I mean, perfect. Just perfect. By the way, I also came up, this has nothing to do with anything, but I also came up with a new, if I ever do a politics show with talking heads who do nothing but spin the news, I'm going to call it Sit and Spin. But anyways, so this is a great name for John's new show.
Jonathan, it's going to have a mature rating after
But basically, players will be challenged to find the connections between 4 groups of words. So it's another play on, like, you got to have a brain if you're a fan of Jonathan Oakes' shows.
I'm not in on this one.
You have to have a brain. So it just seems like a really fun concept. But so he's submitted it to iTunes. So hopefully it'll be out within days. But as soon as you see Foreplay, spelled Four play, then be sure you subscribe. So we're very excited. Congratulations, Jonathan.
On a serious note with Jonathan, I had a chat with him a little while ago. He's building an entire network out of these trivia shows, and I think he's the guy to do it. I think he really owns that space with Trivial Warfare, and now he's even going to own it more. So congratulations and good job.
Yeah, and speaking of networks, I guess networks are popping up all over Florida because that's the next bit of Florida news. So Andy Kushner out in Tampa, who you've met him at the Florida
Yeah,
Podcast
I know
Association
Andy.
meetings. Yeah, he's a regular visitor there with Chris Komitsos. But he's had a really successful podcast called The Wedding Biz, and he's actually now taking the leap and expanding that into the Wedding Biz Network. So Jonathan Oakes is building a network. Andy Kushner is building a network. So he's taking this whole concept and model for his show, and he's building it out to a full network model. And guess whose help he's getting with that, Glenn?
Who?
Me, mine.
So Flintstone Media is involved?
Yes.
Yeah.
So he's hired me to be the podcast network director. And I'm really, really excited to be working with Andy because he's a really, really smart guy. And all right, I'm about to throw you a compliment, so get ready. I like working with smart people. So that includes you, Glenn. But yeah, so his show, like I mentioned, Wedding Biz is really successful. And he has allowed me to suggest an episode if you're interested in hearing what his show's all about. He says, actually, this is an episode that anyone can benefit from. So anyone who's an entrepreneur, business person, which a lot of our audience is, then it's essentially about finding your power. So it's the Brett Culp episode called Obstacle or Opportunity. So I'll go ahead and put a link to that in the show notes. And I want to wish Andy Kushner the best of luck with building the Wedding Biz Network with me. Yay.
Congratulations to both of you. I remember having a conversation with him years ago about this show he does. And I said, and it's the same thing people said to us when we started Horses in the Morning. It's like, what are you going to talk about after a week? and I said to Andy, I said, well, people get married and then they don't care about your show anymore. Who's going to listen? I forgot that people get married more than once, a lot of them.
More than once,
Yeah.
all the time.
I forgot about that.
And they're going to recommend it to their girlfriends who's getting married next.
Yeah, good job for proving me wrong, Andy. I'm glad you did.
And a lot of his shows are really B2B. So they're people who are just in the wedding biz industry. So yeah, that's his main audience. So yeah. So it's going to be solid. I'm really excited. And next up, I want to let you guys know that we are planning, Paul Desmond Adams and I are planning the next meetup for the Palm Beach podcasters. We've actually set the date. I feel like we're ahead of schedule. See, I'm telling you, Hive, it keeps me organized. We're ahead of schedule. We set the date. It's July 16th. And Paul is actually going to be doing a whole presentation on podcasts that convert. A lot of times when you're building a podcast, it's not just a passion project. There's some other reason, you want to grow your business's email list, or you want to monetize it and make some money and da-da-da. So he's going to share a lot of tips on how to do all of that. So if you're in the Palm Beach County area, please meet us on Tuesday, July 16th, around 6:30 at the Venture X in Palm Beach Gardens. And there'll be a link in the show notes. And I want to give a shout out to a Palm Beach podcaster in particular who has reached a huge milestone, not quite 2,200 episodes, Mr. Endurance Podcaster over here, but he's also endured in his own way. So his name's Kerry, and he's from the Financial Survival Network, and he's a member of Palm Beach Podcasters. And major congratulations are due because Kerry is celebrating 8 years in podcasting as of June 6th. That magic number 8 can be horrible in terms of pod fading, because usually people pod fade after 7 or 8 episodes, but he's managed to hang in there for 8 years, and he does it full time. So well done to Kerry and his team at the Financial Survival Network. And that's, like I said, Florida podcasting scene is bursting right now. Lots of amazing things going on. And now we're going to turn our attention to what's going on, generally speaking, all over the podcasting industry with general podcasting news.
Well, I'm sure everybody heard that Apple came out with their category changes this week, and we don't need to go into that in great detail. But I'm sure
everybody else did.
Yeah, everybody else did, and you've all seen it. I just have to gripe about it, to be honest. So we, as horse people and as horse podcasts, never really had a place. So I've been in sports outdoors. That's where we've been in sports outdoors. Most sports are outdoors. I mean. But that's where we've been. We really never had. There has never been a pet category. I can
or
an animal
honestly
category.
Proclaim that you are the last person I would ever think have anything to do with sports. And anytime you had to do something outdoors, you complain about it. So it doesn't make any sense.
So I am very excited to announce that they now have a pets and animals category.
Yay!
No, it's under kids.
Oh.
It's under kids and family. Like, what? So my professional horse shows are under kids and family. Ugh. Our travel show.
Close and yet so far.
Our travel show's under what category? Do you remember? There's a travel category, but it's under some weird head
it's like
category.
Society and culture or people and something like that. Yeah.
There was a better fit for it, and it was weird. I don't know.
Yeah,
and everybody's complaining because they took away the podcasting category. So this show about I don't know where you're going to put this show.
I think it'll end up being how-to technology. Let's do that.
Okay, because that's the only choice we've got.
I think that sounds about good. At least I think that's a category.
It'd be interesting. I'd love to hear from our listeners. Apple and Spotify both announced that they're separating their podcasts away from their music, and they're going to have separate apps and all that. And you all heard about that this week, too. So we don't need to go over that. But I would be interested to hear, we get virtually no listeners from Spotify. And, it could be because we're on a niche with the horse stuff, and, I don't know what we get on the travel side. But I want to hear from somebody who's actually getting a lot of downloads from Spotify, and I want to know what niche you're in. I want to hear where Spotify is succeeding.
Right. And honestly, I didn't know that Spotify did music. Is that?
Yeah, well, that's how it started. It's a music app, and they added podcasts.
See, this is what happens.
Jennifer actually listens to Spotify.
Into podcasts, that's all you care about.
Yep, that's a music. Yeah. That's how it started, Jemmy. That's how they made their money. It wasn't on podcasting.
Just kidding.
Well, speaking of podcast apps and podcast things, we had a chance to catch up with David Cook, who many of you Florida podcasters met at the Tampa meeting. He is of Podcoin. And, Jemmy, I got to say, in this interview, you asked him some questions I have not heard him ask before. So
I tend to do that a lot with people, sometimes over cocktails.
So let's take a listen to what David Cook of Podcoin had to say. Well, we have David Cook of Podcoin on with us, and I know many of you have heard of Podcoin. David made an appearance down here at Tampa at Chris's meeting down there, which usually gets about 50 to 100 people, and I attend sometimes. And I know that you've been talking to a lot of Florida podcasters. So, David, thank you for joining us today and going a little bit more in depth on Podcoin.
Oh, no problem. Thanks so much for having me as well. I'm happy to talk about Podcoin.
So for the two people that haven't heard of Podcoin, can you kind of give a Reader's Digest version of what it is?
Yeah, sure. So my brother and I, we created Podcoin about, in December, and we've been growing it ever since. And essentially what it is we incentivize listening by paying listeners in a digital currency called Podcoin, where while they listen to podcasts, for every 10 minutes, they earn one Podcoin. And it helps incentivize listening to different things. So they could use that Podcoin for different things like gift cards. It's kind of like a rewards program where you listen to podcasts and then you can earn rewards for doing that. And by tinkering around with the amount of Podcoin people can earn for listening to different types of podcasts, you could actually incentivize listening to different types of podcasts. So that's how we kind of came up with a bonus podcast program, which we thought could be a really great way to help promote discovery of podcasts and stuff like that. What we've seen is that Podcoin really kind of has the ability to kind of turn people into podcast listeners. So I think about 40% of people in the U.S. maybe have already listened to a podcast. And so that's kind of something that we really want to grow on, is introducing more and more people to podcasts by partnering with MeetMe and all the properties they run as well. They have over 15 million monthly active users around the world. And we're starting to cross-promote it to them in small ways. And it's really kind of helping it take off. And we're introducing all these new people to podcasting that sometimes have never heard podcasts before. And then even people who did listen to podcasts beforehand, they're talking to us, telling us how they're listening to so many more podcasts. So they listen to all their podcasts on it now. Some people, we have a renewal program where podcasters can do ads for us. And some of them have put in really nice words about us too. They kind of talk about their own experience on it, where they just say stuff like, now I get mad when I don't earn Podcoin or a digital currency listening on another podcast or Podplay or something like that.
clearly money can be a great carrot for like anything, right? You want some people to do something, you offer them a little bit of coin and they're likely to change their behavior and do it more. And so, for the people who maybe needed that one extra little push or prod, making money off of checking out a podcast can be a great way to incentivize them. But it also makes me think that money is also the great corruptor, right? So what have you guys been doing to kind of protect against people who want to game the system?
So we do have certain things in place that are kind of running behind the scenes. So we're kind of always trying to detect people who may be cheating and maybe using multiple accounts or doing stuff like that. And we do have a limit of listening per day so that somebody can't just like leave it open all day and stuff like that. And if they try to do that, they get notifications. And it would be we essentially try to fight that on a couple different levels.
So they can't just leave it open and then just like put it on the side of the bed while they fall asleep and expect to.
Yeah, they would get a notification pretty quickly. Okay. It's like, are you still listening? And that would shut it down. And but also, it's kind of like nobody's really getting rich off these things. You have to do a lot of listening, and I think also after a while, if somebody was trying to game the system like that, they'd be like, this really isn't worth it just to do to kind of just do it all for like a gift card or something like that. Also using our social features to try to fight against this as well. So we encourage people to like post a photo and just show that they're real people who are listening and stuff like that. So podcasters can also see their listeners, like who's coming in, listening to them at any given time. And that's also something that we feel likes and comments will really help kind of enhance as well. So once we get those into the app, what we saw in ReaderCoin as well, which is something we're not doing anymore, but essentially that was an app that had a much smaller listening base, but the likes and comments on it were insane. People were doing that a ton, and I think Podcoin's an even better product. So I think likes and comments are just going to be crazy. People are going to want to be talking to the podcasters and interaction with them. And I think it's going to be cool because I think from surveys that we've given to podcasters, they're going to kind of have fun talking back to them as well.
So a couple of listener questions. I have a group of super fans that brought up Podcoin in their private group the other day, and a lot of people were finding out about it for the first time. Some people have been using it for a while, and that is one comment that we had is, I've been listening for a long time and I don't have enough for a $5 Starbucks gift card. Do you think that that's going to discourage people?
I think if it takes maybe about 2 or 3 weeks to kind of earn your first gift card if you were doing a lot of listening every day. But ultimately, we're not trying to give away too much, essentially, just for listening to a thing that people should enjoy anyway. We believe podcasting, it's a way of telling stories. It's a meaningful connection and stuff like that. So we're not really trying to encourage gamification just for the sense of earning gift cards. We want people to be finding podcasts that they enjoy and that they can listen to. Meanwhile, the earning of Podcoin is just kind of a great thing that they kind of get on the side, that if they do listen to enough of their favorite podcast or something like that, maybe they could earn a free cup of coffee by getting the Starbucks gift card, or essentially get an Amazon gift card over time, or even they could donate that gift coin or Podcoin to charity.
One of the other common threads here was a lot of the listeners tried it and bailed because of the lack of fast forwarding, rewinding, all of the little things, but you said you're going to be addressing those things as time goes on with the players.
Oh, yeah. So, and even in the very next update, I think, in the next 1 or 2 updates, we'll have increased listening speed. We're definitely,
that was a complaint.
So when we launched in December, it was a very minimum viable product and stuff like that. We were just essentially hoping it gets into the App Store and stuff like that.
Okay.
And we've been adding features along the way as we go. We're a small 6-person or 6 to 8 person team working on it right now. But we're constantly building features. We're gonna essentially be enhancing the fast forward, rewind features and stuff like that.
Okay.
We're gonna add playlists pretty soon.
That was a question. Yeah.
But yeah.
The question always is, how do you monetize? How do you stay in business? So what's the plan?
Well, essentially, we have different plans for Podcoin in the future and stuff like that. So we essentially believe that we'll eventually have a charge version where for certain features, we'll always have the free version, but we'll also have a paid version where people could maybe promote their podcast for a certain amount of time. Because we've been seeing that that people have kind of requested that as well. So we see that as an easy way to kind of introduce a little bit of monetization as well.
Well, that's awesome. So if other content creators who are listening to the show want to submit their podcast, let them know how they do that.
If they want to claim their podcast, we probably already have it. If we don't, we could get it added. We work with the Listen Notes provider. They have almost 700,000 podcasts, so we have a good number of them. So once you create an account on Podcoin, you could find your podcast. In the top right corner, there will be a claim podcast button. Just tap that, and we'll get an email, and we'll get you claimed within 24 to 48 hours, but typically much faster than that. I almost always get people in the same day.
Yeah, you were very fast.
Yeah, there's just the verification process where we just check that you're the owner of the podcast and stuff like that.
Perfect. Well, David, thank you so much for your time. You guys are doing really great things with Podcoin, and I think you're going to change the game a little bit, and I'm excited to see where this takes us. Thank you so much.
Well, that was a great conversation with Dave. Good job on asking the questions. He really didn't hold back into digging into the details, which I was waiting for him to do and play politics, but he didn't. So thank you, Dave. And up next, we have our Florida Podcast Network news, followed by my tip on getting sponsors and what's all involved with that. Flintstone Media has been the digital bedrock of several Florida brands and businesses. Serving as a highly resourceful podcast production house, work with a leader in Florida's podcasting industry and add a podcast to your brand's content offerings. From setup through recording and distribution, Jemmy will lend her experience producing over 500 episodes and make the process of creating your show simple and easy for you. Visit flintstonemedia.com for podcast samples. That's flintstonemedia.com. Jemmy could not be more excited about this news of the Florida Podcast Network. We have a new show coming on, and if there was a new show that she could pick and would be her dream new show, would be one she salivates about, one she dreams about in her sleep, it would be a show about beer.
Literally, since day one of conceiving
it is true.
The words Florida Podcast Network, I said, Glenn, I need a show about craft beer. And dreams do come true. Oh my gosh, I'm so excited. So if you are a Floridian and you are a connoisseur of the adult beverages, then you may be aware of a little guy named Dave Butler with an amazing blog called the Florida Beer Blog. I don't know how he came up with the name. I've been racking my brain.
I really encourage people to have descriptive names for their podcasts, but who knows what that's about?
Who knows what Florida Beer Blog could possibly be about? But yeah, so he's been doing this now for like 5 years. He started the beer blog in March of 2014, and it was totally started on a whim, but since then he's been consistently writing about beer all over the state and visiting different breweries any chance he has. Kind of my new best friend. Sorry, you've been demoted, Glenn.
But new co-host.
Get as much out of this show as I can. But yeah, so I'm excited because I've been following, his work, what he's been doing. We've been following each other on social media for a little while. And he started a show called the Florida Beer Podcast. And so I said, oh, wait, what is this? And why is it not on our network? And so I reached out to him and we started chatting. And, it just blossomed. And now he is officially bringing his show, the Florida Beer Podcast, onto the Florida Podcast Network. And I am so excited. We're going to help him develop this into such an amazing, solid show all about the beer and beverage industry, the different events and festivals. So it's going to really speak to, the people who want to go out and find a a great craft beer place and tap room to visit in their local town. And it's also going to speak to like that basement brewer who's thinking about how do we build a show, or the local brewer who's just kind of getting started. The ins and outs of the industry. It's going to be all right. I need to stop because you're clearly I am just super enthused.
And she hasn't even had any beer tonight.
I could go on and on and on, so I'll hold myself back, and instead, I'll let Dave speak for himself. Here's a little clip of our intro interview with Dave Butler from the Florida Beer blog about the Florida Beer podcast, which will be joining Florida Podcast Network here shortly. And this teasing interview, if you want to hear the full thing, you got to make sure you're signed up for Florida Podcast Network's All Shows feed, which you can look up on any of your podcast players. But right now, here's a bit of a clip.
Beer as a topic, especially nowadays, is the perfect fit when you're talking about Florida because it's grown beyond what was traditionally in the 80s and 90s being cases of mass-produced water and Animal House and things like that, to a major part of local and state economies, a major player of tourism in the region. And there's a lot more that's going into it than what had previously been thought. And I thought, I'm not really interested in brewing per se, but let's celebrate it. Let's talk about it. Let's show people what we have.
So when the full interview with Dave, introducing him onto the Florida Podcast Network, comes out, we'll tell you the exact date when these episodes actually start to be found on the Florida Podcast Network. But it's coming out very, very, very soon. But to find out more about the show now, head to floridapodcastnetwork.com/Florida Beer Podcast. And also subscribe now to Florida Podcast Network's All Shows feed, as I previously mentioned, in your favorite podcast player so you don't miss the full interview with Dave, which can only be found there. And also, you'll also get all the episodes of his through that feed as well, so you won't miss a thing.
And now it's time for the training tip. So I thought for this episode we would take on the big question, the question I get most often, the question that I know a little bit about over the years, and
doesn't know much, but knows something.
And the question that's most posted on Facebook. Everybody today that starts a podcast seems to want to monetize within one episode. And, they want to know how to do that. So I can talk about how monetization works in podcasting. And I'll just cover that real quickly. We'll do the Reader's Digest version of that. So there's a couple of different ways. One, you use your podcast to sell something else. You have a service, you have a book, you have something that you do that you sell in addition to your podcast, and it is basically just a marketing arm for that. That's the first way. The second way is you actually have advertising on your podcast that's generated by someone else, and you get paid on the CPM model, which means that you get paid a certain dollar amount for every 1,000 downloads your podcast has. So if the average, and that's usually between $2 and $50 1,000. You'll see sometimes Podbean, Libsyn, and a lot of other people offer the CPM model to podcasters. Most of them require you to have 5,000 downloads an episode. Well, that puts you in about the top 2% of all podcasts in the world if you have 5,000 downloads per episode.
Yeah, our people already kind of blinking an eye when you said, CPM is your per 1,000 downloads. People are like, oh, but I only have 150 downloads. Yeah. And
the average CPM out there right now is $25. So that would mean that if you get 1,000 downloads on an episode, you'd make $25. So you get 250 downloads, you'd make $5-7 somewhere in there.
And this is these are usually typically dynamically inserted processes.
Correct.
Right?
So they'll either go at the beginning, at the end, or the middle, and they'll be put in automatically. You don't have to do anything. I'm not a big fan of dynamically inserted ads, and I know I'm going to get some feedback on this, but because
I'll back you up, because
it disrupts the flow of the show. Because a lot of times they're not at a designated spot, and they just interrupt the show, and all of a sudden you're listening in your earbuds, and you're like, "Whoa!" Because music starts, and they're in the middle of a word.
Or even if it's not, sometimes it's just a a spot in the presentation of a story that is just
Right.
annoying. Like if
Annoying,
I'm
yeah.
watching, it's similar like if I'm watching a video on Facebook. Oh God, like right before the kid runs to greet his dad who's home from the military, they cut to a damn commercial.
By the way, I watch all those videos. I think I can.
Me
I
too.
watch about 1,000 of them. So yeah, it's funny we watch those. So that's another way, the CPM model. And then the third way is you sell your own advertising. And basically your advertiser is paying a flat amount to be on your show. If you're in a niche, this is easier to do than if you're doing a general podcast about yoga. Okay, or not even yoga. If you're doing a general,
Living your best life.
yeah, exactly. If you're a life coach, then it's going to be tougher to sell ads on your own.
Yeah.
In a niche like the horse world, it's actually easier, and travel and what we do and things, it's easier because you're in a niche that people want to reach the active, engaged listener.
Mm-hmm.
So we can have a lot less listeners and be very successful selling our own advertising. And that's what we've done for 10 years on the Horse Radio Network. I think Jennifer billed 36 advertisers last month. And we have a good retention rate. Our advertisers, get this, 70% of our advertisers had been with us consistently for more than 5 years. So that means when they come, they stay. And they stay because it works. They get feedback, they get response. So when we approach somebody, what we talk to them about is we talk to them about the fact that our listeners are the 20% that they're looking for. In every retail operation, you know that 20% of your people buy 80% of the product. That's true in every retail operation I've ever been, and I was a consultant in retail. So 20% of your people buy 80% of your product. You're targeting that 20%. To be honest, the other 80% only gets you 20% of your sales. So you're not targeting them. You want that 20% because the 20% is what makes you money and keeps you in business. So that 20% of people that we're looking for is active, engaged people in your niche. They're the ones that are out there doing it. They're engaged. They're interested in it. That also tends to be a podcast listener, which is why you see the statistics when they come out. They say that 80% of podcast listeners have bought something overall. 80% of podcast listeners have bought something they've heard advertised on a podcast. And that's what we go in. That's how we talk to our sponsors and say, hey, look, I may only have 1,000 downloads, but I have 1,000 downloads of people you want to reach. And they're the active, engaged people. They're the 20% that you're looking for. The people that are actually going to do something and buy. Why? Because they have taken the time and energy to find my show, to subscribe to it, to download it, and then to listen to it.
They're fully engaged.
You can't get any more engaged than that. And once your advertiser understands that and are willing to give you a try, when I first started out, I charged $25 an ad. That was 10 years ago. Okay.
Oh, times have changed.
Yeah, I charge $25 an ad. And I'm going to be honest with you right now. We don't get as much as some people do. We get up to $250 now to $350. But I am also willing to, I have one right now that's coming on. They're a brand new company. They don't have much money. I'm willing to say, look, we'll put you in a spot that's not filled already for $50 an episode. So I'm cutting their rate by 5 times. But I've done this with a number of companies who 6 years later are still with us. We've helped them grow to the point where they're paying full rate.
So there's a key, though, to making this magic all happen. And that's, when you talk about pitching to potential advertisers that your listeners are the 20% that they're looking for, that relies upon there being a big overlap, right, between what your show content is and who your listeners are and the kind of people that they want as customers.
Correct.
So can you speak a little bit about what strategy that you use to pick who that good best match would be? I mean, in the horse world, I think it's, there's a clear model there.
We talked about this before a little bit on one of the other episodes. We identify, like, if I have a show that's about driving carriage horses, we identify everybody in the business who sells to carriage horse people, who makes a product for carriage horse people, who does anything with carriage horse people. And then we contact those people first. And we don't get yeses right away. This is like any other, and this is the part you're not going to want to hear. This is the part that's going to depress the hell out of you. This is a relationship building thing. And Jemmy's learning a little bit about that over the last 2 years too. And it's starting to pay off for us now, things we planted a seed for 2 years ago. It takes a little bit of time to plant those seeds, but what we did is we planted those seeds, and we actually go to the conventions. So I'm leaving next week for Denver for the one trade show. So we go to Denver, we'll spend 4 days there. I'll talk to every stand holder there, every manufacturer there, and we'll plant seeds and we'll plant seeds. And then some of those seeds have taken us 6 to 8 years, and then they come back to us and say, hey, I get this podcasting thing now, or one of their customers said they listen to the show or something like that, and they come back to us then wanting to advertise. But it's like selling anything else. You have to be in front of the people all the time. You have to contact these people all the time. And if you have a way in, if you know somebody who knows somebody, that's much easier than cold calling. Cold calling still is tough. So having a way in and getting introductions from people you know, guests, or other people you know in your industry, to the manufacturers, to the companies, to the people who make the products, that is going to be a better way in. Another trick is we only deal with small to middle-sized companies, ones that do not have ad agencies. Ad agencies change the whole thing, and you're not gonna get anywhere very fast. Jemmy and I have had our experience with ad agencies over the years, and it's difficult.
No offense, of course, to any previously mentioned ad agencies.
Yeah, it's a different beast. You're not dealing directly with the company and the people who care about
the
their
decision
products.
maker, really.
So we, at the Horse Radio Network, we really go after that middle to smaller size company. They may have a couple employees, they may have 40 employees, but they're that middle company who are looking for an affordable way to advertise. And we're still more affordable, and it's going to be true if you have a show about bikes or you have a show about skiing. You're still going to be a less expensive ad than they're paying in the magazines. In our world, in the horse world, you'll pay $3,000 a month for a full color ad in a magazine, one magazine.
Yeah.
So, we still are the affordable alternative. And once they give us a try, they tend to stick with us.
And that's part of the selling, because not only are we more affordable, but then you're also explaining to them that overlap that you talked about between your audience and who their potential customers are. And because it's so, if you're finding the right people, because there's such a big overlap there, that, not only is it less dollars that they're putting in to invest in the advertisement, but then they know that the people, even if it's a smaller quantity of people, they know that that quantity is exactly who they need to be in front of. So those are the two pieces of the coin that you need to really sell, an advertisement to such a niche kind of audience like that. Yeah.
But it's a relationship-building business. You're going to have to get out of your comfort zone and start meeting people. In our case, I would say 80% of our ad sales have come from in-person contacts at trade shows. 80% of them. But, I know that requires spending money. That requires time. I'm just telling you what has worked for us, and it's a question I get all the time. And it's a long haul. It's a lot of work. Now, has it paid off for us? It has. We're making a living doing this, and we have for a long time. So, for us, it has paid off. Are we making the most money I've ever made in my life? No. Am I having more fun than I had when I was making the most money in my life? Yes. So
I have nothing to do with that whatsoever, right? Not at all. No fun on this side of the microphone whatsoever. Well, you know what? Maybe in a future tip, I'll talk about how SEO can help drive perhaps who those ideal potential advertisers are right to you too.
And we have seen that thanks to you in the short time with our Florida Travel Show and Florida Podcast Network. We've seen your SEO tips really work. And that happened in a short time. It happened for me over a long period of time because we've been 10 years and had over 10,000 guests. So if you look up a guest name, we're going to show up.
Again, all about endurance.
Yeah. So, one of the things I would say is if you have relationships in your niche, those are where you go to first.
Yeah.
I knew our first advertiser. I knew her. She knew of me. She didn't know a thing about podcasting. It was 10 years ago. None of us knew anything about podcasting. I went to her and what you're selling when you sell anything is yourself. You're selling you. You are the business. You are your podcast. You are the reason people come and listen. They come for the content. They stay for the host. So when you go, you have to sell yourself. That's what you're selling. And that's, by the way, that sponsor, 10 years later, is still our biggest sponsor and never missed a week. The one other thing I'm going to say that makes our advertising work is we get the advertiser involved. They are involved in some way in the ads. Give you an example. We have retailers. We actually record them, and they come on and do a product of the week. So they highlight one of the products, give more information about it, give more details about it. So it's not just a commercial by us. They're involved. And when they're involved, they hang around longer because they have pride in what they do. I know, that was way too long, and I apologize. Jemmy's just bored because she's heard it before.
So when is the book coming out, Glenn?
There's no book. I can't write. Jemmy knows my writing skills are zero. So
yeah, I should stop pushing for a book because all that's going to mean is I'm going to be asking.
You're going to be writing it. That's exactly right. Yeah, you better stop asking. All right, let's wrap this thing up.
Oh my gosh. Well, for more updates on all of this and other news, plus details and show notes about today's show, go to floridapodcastnews.com. You can find details and show notes about today's episode, plus sign up to receive the newsletter that accompanies this podcast on the 15th of every month. So you don't want to miss out on all the goodies. And we don't want to miss out on your feedback. So please join our closed Facebook group. It's exclusive for fans of all the Florida Podcast Network shows, including the brand new Florida Beer Podcast. I'm so excited. So just search for FPN Insiders on Facebook to leave us comments and gain access to early scoops. I mean, that group was the first to know about Florida Beer Podcast joining in. So I'm just saying, join FPN Insiders on Facebook if you want to be first next time. And we look forward to meeting you in there. And if you have any podcasting news to submit to the show or to our newsletter, particularly if you are a Florida podcaster and have done something new and awesome and cool and great, please email me at Jaime, Jaime, at floridapodcastnetwork.com.
Many thanks to this week's sponsor, Flintstone Media, and be sure to visit all the great shows on the Florida Podcast Network. You can find them at floridapodcastnetwork.com. Until next time, thanks for hanging out on the inside of Florida's podcasting industry. And in honor of Jemmy and beer, cheers!
How are you the one drinking during the recording of this and not me? What the heck?